part 2 of Get Informed About Police Reform, our explainer series that we're running all summer before the anticipated special session of the General Assembly to help people who maybe aren't criminal defense lawyers or aren't involved in criminal justice reform, to help you get more informed about the issues so you can become better volunteer advocates and get involved in the movement. Tonight's installment of the series is about pretextual policing and police reforms that don't work. And we are joined tonight by 3 public defenders and court-appointed attorneys. We're joined by them, and I was going to get to this later, but I'll just mention it now. A lot of you may not know this, but in the United States, about 80% of criminal cases are handled by court-appointed counsel. About 75% of them are handled by public defenders, and the rest are handled by court-appointed attorneys. So these are the people who know what is going on in our criminal courts nationwide and in Virginia. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panel. We are joined today by Lakeisha Stevenson. Lakeisha was born in Portsmouth, Virginia. She was raised by her maternal grandparents. She was the first in her family to graduate from college when she received a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice from North Carolina Central University in 2007. She's currently the Deputy Public Defender at the Portsmouth, Virginia office. So please welcome Lakeisha. We also have Brian Kennedy. Brian Kennedy is the Policy Director for Justice Forward Virginia. He's also a Senior Assistant Public Defender in Fairfax County, where he has tried cases ranging from driving without a license to murder. So full spectrum of criminal cases. And Sean Stout is also here. Sean is a private criminal defense attorney in Northern Virginia as well, and he has defended people in courts all over the area in cases also ranging from as minor as traffic infractions all the way up to murder. So before we get into the meat of it, I think one thing that is important for us to discuss, as with any time you have a problem, if you're going to solve that problem, you need to first of all know what the problem really is. So you need to know what problem is that you've got to solve. Right now, in this moment in the United States, there's a lot of information that's been coming at us. A lot of tragic stories. A lot of people, a lot of opinions. We all know the tragic events that led to George Floyd's death and Breonna Taylor's death, but this has been going on much longer than that. There have been deaths throughout the decades, and we finally come to a flashpoint in human history where something has to change. But we're now left with the question, what do we do next? And that really is a vexing question because a lot of people haven't really thought about it before. Unless you are directly affected by the criminal justice system, or you are people like us who work in it on a daily basis, it's hard to know really where the problems lie in our system and what we need to do to fix them. So we wonder, the question I think a lot of times that you wonder is, in a case like this, is all that we're concerned about police using force when they arrest people? Is it just about choking deaths like you have with George Floyd? Is it just about how gentle police are when they put people in handcuffs or lock them into cages? Is that all we're worried about? Is it just the process by which 1 million Black Americans have ended up in jails and prisons in the United States? Because that's how many Black Americans there are in jails and prisons right now. Or are we concerned about the fact that they're in jails and prisons to begin with? This, I think, may seem like a rhetorical question, and I'm kind of answering it as I'm going along. The problem is, I think, that our system seems to create more problems than it actually solves. But before we move on, I wanted to turn it over to y'all just to talk a little bit more about your experience. I'll turn to Lakeisha first. How long have you been a public defender, Lakeisha?
Oh, now 8 years, but I interned all 3 years while I was in law school.
During that time, how many criminal cases do you think that you've handled?
Ooh, hundreds. I know over 1,500. And
of the cases that you've handled, can you tell us a little bit about the demographics of the clients that you've represented, the human beings, the individuals you've represented?
Yeah, and I've been here in Portsmouth the entire time. In Portsmouth, the makeup of the city is primarily just Black and white. It's about half and half, but majority of the clients have been Black. I've had white clients, but the majority of the white clients that I've represented have come from lower income backgrounds. But even though the city is about half and half, majority of the clients have been Black. We have very few population of other races that we represent here in Portsmouth.
And I know I was given a bit of a monologue, but what do you, based on your experience in, through your job and representing people who've been affected by our criminal justice system, what do you get the sense from them and from their communities and their families as to what the problems are here that need to be dealt with in this moment in American history?
Primarily, they feel that they're harassed by the police. They're stopped more times than not. They're handled roughly by the police. They're talked to disrespectfully by the police. Once they've had one contact with the police seem to continue to either harm them, even if they see them out in public places, and they may not even be doing anything. So it's a negative view here. They don't trust the police. And primarily the harassment, the disrespect, the disregard for their lives, their families' lives, is the main thing they feel here.
Brian, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think we hear the same things from our clients. Our client base is Black, white, and Hispanic up in Fairfax. So there's a little bit more diversity, and that comes with issues with translation and dealing with people who don't speak English, which creates a separate complication for all of this. Because I think with the respect aspect of it that Keisha was talking about, that people could be using translators, police officers could be using translators with that population, and they're not. But definitely the stopping people quite a bit, feeling like certain parts of the county have more stops in them than other parts of the county. And that's not just a feeling, that's statistically true, that the richer, whiter parts of the county are not seeing the same type of police involvement as the poor Black, Hispanic, and Asian parts of the county. So it's definitely, that's not something people need to live in the whole different parts of the county to understand. Everybody knows where the police are, and it creates a rift between the citizens and the police department, which then cycles into a lot of the problems that we have.
Sean, how about you?
Same thing. Most of my practice is in Prince William County. And so obviously, like any large county, there are places that are drastically more police than others. Lakeisha used the words disrespect and disregard. And I think both of those are something we hear about all the time. Just a sort of an inability to treat our clients like people, because either they are Black, Hispanic, or from lower income. Like you said, when we do have white clients, they don't tend to be from the rich neighborhoods. And so I would essentially just echo the same things that Brian and Lakeisha said about my clients' concerns and the stuff they run into, and the disparities between, where those things are happening depending on where you live.
Yeah, so I think that we have consensus here. This is a real surprise, I know, but I think all of us, as we have been watching what's played out, the grave tragedies that have happened, in Louisville and Minneapolis and so many other places, we know we understand the tragedy like anyone. It affects us like anyone. But I think it hurts as someone who's spent time in this, working within this system, because what it is I think the ultimate symptom of a system that is broken at its foundations, a system that regularly tolerates excessive force, that regularly puts up with it, makes excuses for it, that doesn't hold the people accountable who inflict that force on particularly Black and Latinx individuals. A system that regularly puts up with that kind of injustice must be absolutely corrupt at its foundations. And I think that's why it hurts, of course, the tragedy of losing a life, but to know that this is how bad our system has gotten. And I think understanding this is why, as reformers, and I think we can move on to our next subject, the reforms that we want to focus on, one of the topics we're talking about tonight, is limiting unnecessary police contacts. Because the fact of the matter is, you may want one way to have fewer people die from interactions with police certainly is to ask them to be gentler. Another way to do it is to keep those contacts from happening to begin with. So if I could see the slide related to police reforms that don't work or don't solve the problems at hand, we'll just get through these quickly before we move on to some of the pretexts that we see in Virginia law. When there was first this discussion about what do we do in response to the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, saw a lot of people rush into the spotlight who really wanted to focus on things like the point of arrest. They wanted to focus on, again, like I said, making police officers kinder and gentler, talking about things like implicit bias training or diversity hiring initiatives, things like that, things like body-worn cameras, use of force restrictions. All you got to do is look at some of the research on these, and we won't spend a lot of time on them. Implicit bias training has been, in fact, nationwide. I think President Obama first had one of the first DOJ initiatives on that 12 years ago, and the research shows it has barely any effect at all. Diversity hiring initiatives have the same problems. Places where that's happened, you still have the same number of arrests, yet still have the same rate of excessive force. Community policing is thought to make cops kinder and gentler and more relatable to their communities, but overall, they don't affect the number of arrests that take place. Sometimes they even increase them because you're increasing the presence of police in a neighborhood. And then furthermore, we have a whole slew of policies that are now being discussed in the Virginia General Assembly, and I'll turn to you, Brian, on this. Reforms that, quite frankly, we shouldn't even have to debate. Things like chokeholds, use of force standards. Brian, can you speak on that for a moment?
Sure. So, like Brad said, when everyone was rushing to say what reforms we should have, people said, well, we need to ban chokeholds because that's what killed George Floyd. And the fact of the matter is most police officers, if you talk to them, would say, well, we don't use chokeholds. And most police departments would say, we already ban chokeholds. We don't train on them, nothing like that. So that's interesting that people want to create a statute to ban chokeholds or say police officers aren't going to do that anymore. But the fact of the matter is that's already what police supervisors are telling patrol officers. It's just a matter of what patrol officers are doing on the street or this informal training a lot of cops get once they leave the academy by more experienced police officers that contradicts what they're trained on in the academy. And that's the same thing with use of force standards and de-escalation training. Most police departments around the country, certainly most bigger police departments, already do that on paper, I should say. We probably, at least every time I've cross-examined a police officer, and that's how I formally talk to police officers, right? And I say, well, you're aware of your general orders about use of force, and you're supposed to do A, B, and C. And most of them say, I know we have a general order about use of force, about de-escalation, about interpreter use, about whatever, but they don't know what it says. Because maybe they read it in the academy, but that's not what they're focusing on. They're focusing on what did their master patrol officer tell them, their training officer tell them when they were a rookie. So implementing those standards is nice, but it's maybe not going to solve the problems. And it should be really easy because everyone should agree that you should have to do something before you tase someone, do something before you shoot somebody, and have a reason to shoot somebody or have a reason to tase somebody. There also shouldn't be as much debate as there probably is about independent investigations of excessive force or deaths and expanding data. Both of those seem like a really good idea. The police department or prosecutor's office that works together all the time shouldn't be the one deciding whether the police officer in that department gets charged with a crime. And if we want to figure out what's wrong with our system, we should collect data to figure out, where are the stops coming from, who are they stopping, and have that. A lot of police departments do keep that data, again, especially the bigger ones. But some of the smaller ones push back on that. But we really should all agree that if we're going to make decisions, it should be evidence-based and based on the facts. Maintaining a database of dirty cops. Right now, we have problems. As everyone knows, a cop has misconduct in one location. They get hired the next county over, the next state over. We shouldn't be doing that, and everyone should know who those police officers are. Some progressive prosecutors run on, we're going to keep a database of bad cops. That should not be an amazing campaign promise. That should be, it's actually probably required under the Constitution already. And then demilitarization, where cops don't need tanks You know, was it in LA where the LA school district police department had a tank?
I think Judge Dredd needs a tank.
Right.
But that's about it. You know, until we get to the apocalyptic, you know, hellscape of Judge Dredd, I think we're going to be all right without tanks.
Right. And it's tanks, and then, you know, but it's also things like, you know, stingrays, people have heard of that, airplanes, helicopters, drones, all sorts of stuff that police departments have that create a lot of privacy issues and also create a lot of, why do they need that type of firepower? Why does the school police need a grenade launcher? You know, so again, we should probably all agree on those, or it should be easier to agree on those. But even those reforms are not going to solve the problem.
Yeah, and I want to clarify something also. So when I say that police reforms don't work, sometimes they work for certain purposes. It's just not the purposes that we need them to work for, given our current problems. So body cams are a good thing. Body cams help keep people accountable for, you know, it increased the reliability of the court process. You can see what actually happened. Great. What they don't do is reduce the incidence of excessive force, and they don't reduce racial disparities. Also, same, you know, like I was saying, community policing, actually, I don't think that's helpful at all myself. Maybe a little bit, you know, your community gets to know the people who are policing it because they're living there. Fine, that's good. Diversity hiring initiatives, of course, just as a matter of human life, like it's good to do those things. But like the point I was getting at was it just doesn't reduce excessive force, doesn't reduce racial disparities, doesn't limit the intrusion of police activity into the lives, especially of, you know, in Black and Latinx communities. Lakeisha, Sean, you want to weigh in on this before we move on? Either of you?
I completely agree with you, because the body cams, all it does is keep an even playing field sometimes with the cases when you get to court, but the officers have figured out ways to either turn it off or to say that I'm hot when they're doing something they have no business doing, and they just turn them off. And it's not stopping them from stopping people and harassing them. And then the diversity doesn't help, because then you get, and I'll say it, you'll get Black people on the force who want to impress their white counterparts, and he sometimes act worse than the white police officers to impress them, whether it's the code of blue silence or whatever the case may be. But they turn out to be a hot ass mess too. So that's not the issue of is diversity.
Sean, thoughts?
Just jumping onto the body cam thing, like I obviously like having body cams when it comes to, you know, assessing the evidence, because, you know, it makes it a little more difficult for police to make shit up. But at the end of the day, what we see, they're either, you know, turning the radio on so you can't hear what's going. Every cop in every jurisdiction I practice in turns off the volume when they're talking to any other police officer about anything. And so, you know, they're limited utility. And like you guys have pointed out, they don't reduce use of force. So at the end of the day, we just have a video of the use of force happening. Good, but not the solution.
Yes, so you guys get it, I think. We can't just be dealing with the point of arrest stuff or coming up with a kinder, gentler police force. And to the extent that we want to do that, why are we even debating about it? Because this stuff is a no-brainer. Cops shouldn't be allowed to choke people to death. Yes, you should have you know, standards for when you get to kill someone. It's simply, we shouldn't even waste 2 breaths debating this. Just get it done. We should be spending the time debating policy when it comes to our next topic, which is essentially the over-policing of American communities, particularly communities of color. And the number one method that is used to do that is called pretextual policing. So this may surprise you, because we have a constitution that prohibits discrimination, but cops, they can pull you, if you are Black, they can pull you over because you're Black. They just can't say it. They have to come up with a different reason to lie about the real reason they're doing it. That is, in essence, what a pretext is. You can shroud that in all the fancy legalese you want, but what a pretext is, it's a lie. It means the police officer is doing one thing, but he's saying he's doing another thing. A lot of these pretexts, and we're going to talk about them because they're just so ridiculous, and Virginia has some of the most absurd, a lot of them relate to traffic stops. So a very common situation you have is a police officer sees a young Black man in a car. He doesn't like how the young black man looks, doesn't like how the car he's driving looks. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to go find something out about this guy. I'm going to see if I can search his car, see if I can find some drugs or find a gun. He has no reason to believe that that person has guns or drugs. He can't just be like, okay, yes, in this police report, yes, I saw a black guy and I wanted to pull him over to see if he had drugs. But what he can do is follow him for, a few blocks until he notices a little light out, a parking light or something wrong about the car, some traffic violation, some equipment violation. And there are thousands of them. There are literally thousands of them. There's an entire volume, probably this thick. It's probably 700 pages long, just devoted to traffic violations in Virginia. And all of those are the lies that the police can use to pull that car over. And once they pull that car over, then starts that little game, that little dance, which is one of intimidation of the individual who's driving the car. Sir, can I search your car? Do you mind if I search your car? And then the person sitting in the driver's seat has to be thinking, okay, I remember seeing the video of Philando Castile. I remember what happened to Sandra Bland. What am I going to do right now? Am I going to die today? Or am I going to comply and just hope I get through this? This is the real menace that we deal with in Virginia. This is pretextual policing. And it was enabled by the war on drugs, but it's what produces racial disparities, over policing of communities of color. And we're going to talk right now about all the absolutely absurd reasons that a police officer can operate on their bias, on their overt racism, on their hunch, on whatever dumb reason that shouldn't be allowed under law. So with that, again, I'll get off my soapbox and we will move on to our first pretext. So Jack, I think we've got a slide about defective equipment, and Lakeisha's gonna take it from here and talk about, and by the way, I got to be on the soapbox and preach on this. And all of you, if you want to weigh in, just your personal thoughts on what sort of the topic I just said, the general topic, please do so, because people need to hear this. We see it every day. It pisses us off because we work on it. And I know you feel the way I do, probably maybe even stronger. So feel free to, weigh in on that, any of you, as you talk about this stuff.
Yeah, so defective equipment, essentially the officers can pull you over under the code section 46.2-1003. And essentially any type of equipment, whether it's a third brake light, regular brake light, if an inspection sticker, a broken passenger side mirror, things like that, they use that as a reason to pull someone over. And then once they pull you over, they state that's the reason, and they get there and ask, can they search the vehicle? Or they ask for everyone's in the car ID license if everyone has it. But that's the reason initially they say they're stopping the individuals, and that's what that code section allows them to do. And I know the tag light over the license plate is one of the main things that they get pulled over. I think Brad, you had a story, or Brian has a story.
Yeah.
About that.
So I won't tell you where this happens. Probably do a little sleuthing. You can probably guess, but there's an officer in a local police force, and over the course of a few years, I was in court a bunch of times, and I watched one motion in circuit court where the person was trying to suppress the stop. Basically, what the lawyer was arguing was that this officer violated his client's rights, his Fourth Amendment rights, and that he was stopped for no reason at all. The reason he was being stopped was a broken tag light. So you may not even realize you have these lights, but on every car that is inspected, registered in Virginia, right above your license plate, you have a light, maybe two lights, illuminating that license plate on the back. You can either have that, sometimes you can have it illuminated from the sides if it lights up the license plate well enough. If merely one of those lights that's above that little license plate is out, you can be pulled over at any moment of any day if the police officer wants to pull you over. Doesn't need any other reason. Doesn't matter if that license plate is clear as the midday sun to the officer. You know, he could see every number from 1,000 feet, and it doesn't matter. That's still a valid excuse to pull that car over. Well, that's exactly what happened in the case that I was watching. I was sort of like, I can't believe this is going on. And the motion to suppress was denied. The judge said, well, I see the case here. I see the judge in this, a court of appeals said doing this is okay. So I got to deny that motion. I guess it was constitutional for, in this case, it was a Hispanic man who was pulled over for this. And I went away just thinking that's nonsense. And then I had 2 cases of my own over the next 2 months. One with a Black client, another with Hispanic client, same exact scenario. No reason to worry about the safety of that car driving around. No difficulty seeing the license plate. This cop was just going around this area looking for this little tag light out so he could pull over minorities, as it appeared to me. That's perfectly lawful under the law as it's written right now. And that's the kind of thing that needs to change. So that's my story.
I'll chime in. I had one, I think it was in Fairfax, where the officer made the stop for the tag light being out, but then in the process, right as he's turning his lights on to go stop him, he calls it in and reads the license plate off, so that we know that that plate was illuminated. But sort of expanding on Brad's point, you don't even have to have those lights. Like if your tail lights naturally illuminated, you're not required to have separate lights to illuminate your tail. But if you have one and it's broken, then they can stop you for that, regardless of whether they can read the plate. It's ridiculous.
Okay, so you got that one. We're knocking that one out. We're moving from the absurd to the completely ridiculous to dangling objects. And to talk about dangling objects, Brian Kennedy, take it away.
We have a slide on this as well. So there's part of the Code of Virginia that says you can't have a dangling object. So what we're talking about here is your rear view mirror in your car. You can't have anything coming down from that. And the code says it's supposed to be anything that blocks your view of the road. So getting ready for this, driving on 66 today, I was looking forward and basically was thinking that my rear view mirror is so far over to my right that if anything's dangling from that, it's blocking like the other lane of traffic. It's not even going to block the highway in front of me. And if we go to the next slide, you can see the code there. So the next slide, there was a case where a lot of you probably live in apartment buildings or have something from your work that shows a parking pass that is designed and made to put up on your rearview mirror. So this guy was driving a car with that up there, and the measurements are in there because that image, the Court of Appeals, who actually got this right, one of the only times you'll hear me saying the Court of Appeals of Virginia got something right, but it was 3 inches wide by 5 inches long. So it didn't even come more than 5 inches down past the rearview mirror. It basically looked like that in the picture that's up there. So the Court of Appeals said that's not blocking anyone's view of the highway. It may be blocking part of the sky. So we're not going to agree with the stop. But the Supreme Court of Virginia overturned that and said, no, you can stop someone even for having that type of dangling object. The Court of Appeals judges I heard later talking on a panel, basically apoplectic, saying, well, you can't have anything hanging from your rearview mirror. It's ridiculous. You're going to get stopped for any reason. And that's what the law is in Virginia right now. And if we go to the next slide, there's a bunch of things that everyone has hanging from their mirrors. It's not just the fuzzy dice that your uncle had, at one point in the 90s up there. It's, after graduation every June, how many white girls are running around with a little tassel from their graduation hanging from their rearview mirror, or a rosary, or a crucifix, or air fresheners. Again, all things that are designed to hang there. And right now, masks. I see tons of people driving around trying to remember if there are masks to be up there. They hang their mask right off, which in theory is a good idea. Don't forget your mask. But if any of those are hanging from your mirror, anything at all, a cop can stop you. And even, his view from right behind you, looking through your car that is blocking the highway, isn't what your view is in the driver's seat. So general legal advice for everyone, don't have anything hanging from your rearview mirror. But if you do, a cop can stop you at any time in Virginia.
Better legal advice, change the law so you can dangle whatever objects you want. Yes. And by the way, I read an article that covered this. It was like 5 years ago because it was covered by the Marshall Project, which is a criminal justice reform, like a media organization. And they actually interviewed one of the makers of these air fresheners. And he said something like, he is sold 1 billion, or his company sold 1 billion of these air fresheners over however many years. He said that they sell as many air fresheners in a year as McDonald's does hamburgers. Probably an exaggeration, but still, you understand the scope of the problem. Pretty much, it's just an omnipresent reason to harass whoever you want. All right, Sean. So pretexts don't just have to do with traffic, though. One of them can be both for traffic and just if you see somebody on the street, or even if someone's in their house, and that is this mysterious, unimpeachable odor of marijuana that cops seem to smell everywhere. So Sean, why don't you go ahead and talk to us about the odor of marijuana?
Yeah, so this one really grinds all of our gears, I think, a lot. It's the biggest gaping hole in the Fourth Amendment protections that exists, because it really just requires police officers to say 3 words, right? I smell marijuana. And that gets them to search your person, your car, your apartment, your hotel room, really anything they want under the way the Virginia case law shakes out. There's no way to disprove that. A body camera doesn't tell us whether there was an odor of marijuana. You can cross-examine officers, and in a lot of cases, I'll ask, has anyone ever tested you to see if you can actually determine the smell of marijuana, or tell the difference between the smell of marijuana and any other odor on the planet? The answer is no. The only testing or training that they receive on the odor of marijuana is that someone at the academy passed some around and we smelled it. And then the rest is based on experience. But we see cases all the time where they find no marijuana, right? They search because of the smell of marijuana, and we see a case because they find something else. They find someone in the car with a suspended license. They find some other type of drug, guns, anything. And that's how the cases come to our attention. And, we raise these in motions to suppress, but they didn't find any, right? The cop says he smelled marijuana, but there wasn't any. So that shouldn't be a good basis for the search. But the way that the cases come down in Virginia is that the cop literally just has to say, I smelled marijuana. Like there doesn't have to be any additional proof on top of that in order to get into your car, get into your house, and really ruin your evening, even if you don't have anything. Because the thing that is really disturbing is that, the cases that come to our attention as defense attorneys are ones where they did find something got charged, or, the person caught an attitude and then they pick up a disorderly or an obstruction charge or something like that. But what we don't see is the, countless cases where people are harassed in this way. They're searched, they're patted down, actually, like personal physical intrusions, and then they're sent on their way because nothing is found, right? We don't know how many of those are happening day to day, how many, rooms, cars, things like that get searched. It gets really absurd when you talk about stopping cars for the odor of marijuana. You hear cases about officers smelling raw marijuana from a moving vehicle from several car lengths away. It's just magical how well they are able to smell things. It's exactly, what we're talking about, where they see someone, maybe they have some indication that person has a history, they run a license plate, they see a criminal record, and then they want to get into their stuff. All they have to say is I smell marijuana. And they tend to say that, like my old partner and I used to have sort of a bit about how officers were trained that certain people look like they smell like marijuana. Like, oh, that guy looks like he smells like marijuana. I think I'll go search him. And that's really kind of what the standard is, right? If a cop looks at you and says, I think he smells like marijuana, doesn't matter if he can actually smell you, he can come and mess with you and search you. And so it's really wide open, and it is disturbing just how unlimited that power has been found to be in Virginia. No matter what they want to get into or under what circumstances, the courts of appeals say, sure, that's fine. The cop said he smelled marijuana. Marijuana is illegal. Go get it. And so now we have, decriminalization, this thing that is now being deemed by our legislature to be worthy of only a $25 fine. But still, police, I talked to a lawyer the other day that trains police at the academy, which I don't like that at all. But anyways, in those trainings, he teaches them right now, you can still search based on the smell of marijuana. I think it'll be interesting to see how the courts of appeals come down, given that we have a more robust medical law now and they have decriminalization. But I have a guess as to how the court of appeals will come down on the smell of marijuana during this time period. But as you're talking about with the pretextual stops, there's a way to fix that from a legislative angle, and it's pretty simple.
Yeah, there is, and I think this is the point a lot of people need to know. Your legislature decriminalized marijuana effective July 1st. So whatever, 14 days ago, right? So it's legal. It's kind of legal, kind of, right? Like, I can't harass you anymore. Wrong. They can. There is and they all thought about it before this law got changed. It was actually proposed that there would be language in this new bill that would prohibit police from using the odor of marijuana to stop or search someone, because it didn't decriminalize all pot possession offenses. It's still illegal to distribute pot or to possess large quantities of pot. That's still illegal. So that still would give a cop ostensibly grounds to stop you or search you. The General Assembly declined to include that language prohibiting stops and searches based on the odor of marijuana. They declined to do that. That is the only thing that would keep this from having racially disparate impact. Because no cop really cares about pot. No one in the world cares about pot. Like, I think 95% of the county I live in wants it to be completely legal. No one cares. The reason cops care about it is because they know how powerful a tool it is for stopping and searching the people that they have a hunch they want to investigate, who just, by the way, just disproportionately happen to be Black and Latinx. So, yeah, we could talk about this for ages. I mean, there's so many other angles on this, like the cops who say that they can tell burnt marijuana from fresh marijuana. There's also a rule in Virginia law and United States law that if you smell it, you can't stop or search someone unless you can individualize and particularize that odor to one person. Well, anyone who's ever smelled pot in an area before, so you've been at a Fish concert, or I don't even know what other concert, I don't know what concerts people go to these days, but you can smell pot in the air. Can you really find the single person who's smoking it? It's everywhere. But cops all the time say, oh yeah, I smelled it in the air and I could particularize it to this certain car or this certain door or this certain person's back pocket. It's just a bunch of nonsense. And it's crazy. We got to get rid of it. Thoughts, Keisha or Brian, on this topic? Because it's big.
No, it's so true. And not only the smell, when they go up to a car, when they see anything green, they say they think it's pot, like little leaflets. It doesn't have to be a large amount, anything. It could be grass that's on the floorboard of the car. And they're saying, I suspect that that's marijuana. And that's what they're using to either search or harass people.
We have a local cop who carries a lint roller in his car, and he'll roll it on the floorboard and pick stuff up and say that's probably marijuana because it's a green leafy substance, and has used that to even charge people, I think.
That's classy.
Yeah.
I tell you, and I think, we're all defense attorneys. You ever try, I know we all try, right? You try to cross-examine the line cop about the odor of pot. How does that go? Tell any of you.
No.
How does it go? Brian?
Doesn't go anywhere.
Why not?
Isn't it true you didn't smell pot? No. Well, you could just say.
And by the way, yeah, even when you actually have some cross-examination of the officer, like, okay, you said you smelled, you stopped this car, you found this package, you found it under a seat. You found it under a seat in a Ziploc bag. And inside the Ziploc bag was another Ziploc bag. Inside of that Ziploc bag was a jar that was closed shut, sealed shut. And inside the jar were two baggy corners of pot. And you said you could smell it through all of that? And they'll say yes. And the police won't have any problem, or the judge won't have any problem believing it.
No problem.
It's a really good pot.
Not even finding marijuana.
Yes. Sean said it's really good pot. Maybe it is. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, an odor is not something you can recreate. Like an eyewitness says they see something from across the street. Well, as a lawyer, as an investigator, you can go out to that street. You can stand where they stood. You can put somebody in the place where they said they saw something happen. And you can be like, you know what? You can't really see that. You can even get a jury to go out there, right? But if a cop says, I smelled this thing in this place at this time, smells don't just hang around forever. You know, the odor of pot is gone. I don't know how long it takes to dissipate. But, you know, that's not something that you can impeach with objective evidence.
No.
Right.
And
Yeah.
most of the time you find it, they don't even find marijuana. In our cases, they never find marijuana when they say they smelt it and that was the reason they started the search. Yep. They never find it. But the officers are getting so good, you'll see them on a body camera. They'll instantly just say when they walk up, you smell pot, right? Yeah, I smell pot. They know they can use that. And as long as they say that, they're using it now too.
Yeah, my favorite ones are when the rookie goes up to the car and then comes back and says everything looks good, and the training officer says, yes. I mean, I smell marijuana. I have this faint smell of marijuana in there. And the fact that I've seen that multiple times is crazy, because how many times did I not see that?
Mm-hmm.
And sort of the alternative to walking right up and smelling it, we also see, you know, they go through full investigation. They're trying to, you know, run some DUI tests, something like that. They're asking questions. Nothing comes of it. And then, you know, 15 minutes into the interaction, the officer now smells marijuana. And so now we have a reason to search, but none of that was mentioned for the first 15 minutes of video.
I'm just going to complain. Again, I complain a lot. It's part of my job, a big part of my job. But I'm going to complain about the legislative process for a second, because we're having this great conversation. And I know people on Facebook Live and friends of mine are texting saying, I didn't know that. Like, this is crazy. Well, you know, the legislature didn't know it either. And the reason they didn't know is because they didn't ask. Because there are 500, 600 public defenders in Virginia. You know, there are thousands in the country. We know this stuff. There are people from affected communities that know this stuff. We aren't invited to the table. So we got to have events like this where we go off on the whole situation. And I think the reason we aren't invited is because when you start talking about it, it's just so obvious how crazy it is. Like, this situation's got to stop, right? Anyway, all that's to say, you know, we're going to move on to the next one, but this is why we're doing this. We're doing this so that you know how crazy it is, so that you are equipped, you're mobilized, you can be an effective volunteer advocate. You can be as outraged. You can get on your soapbox in Senator such and such's office or on a Zoom meeting with them, and you can change the law. So, moving on. Lakeisha, we're going to talk to us about high crime, high drug areas.
Yeah, it should be a slide for that. Most people don't know that officers cannot just come up to you and stop you, pat you down, go in your pockets, take things out of it. The Fourth Amendment is supposed to protect you for that. And then some US Supreme Court law supposed to come out and put these layers in place that officers are not allowed to just come and do that. There are factors that they have to consider when they want to come up and stop someone and either frisk them, or they've got to have probable cause to actually search them. One of the things that they like to use, unfortunately, is high crime, high drug area. Factors that they sometimes use: the person seems nervous, the time of day or night, and then a high drug, high crime area comes in when they're saying, well, for either officer safety, or they made arrests there, they've made drug busts there, they know this place to have a lot of crime. They're using it as an extra layer to say why I'm now allowed to pat someone down, why I'm now allowed to go in someone's pockets. And they use it all the time. And when you have suppression motions, you go in front of these judges and all the officer has to say is, well, I made a drug arrest there a week ago, or there was a shooting that I know that happened 2 nights ago. And sometimes it doesn't have to be at night where they're stopping. They're saying they're using this excuse as a high crime, high drug area and traffic stops, street stops. It can be the middle of the day. And then they're adding this extra layer of, and they were nervous, but 4 officers walked up on someone either for this defective equipment, a tail light out, but 4 officers are coming to the scene with 3 different police cars, or you're walking down the street and they say they want to have a conversation with you. And then when you get there to have the motion to suppress, this is the reason that they're using as a high crime, high drug area, but we know what area that is. That's the low income, the communities of color, and those areas are frequently called the high crime, high drug area. And in a lot of cities, there is no area that's not a high crime, high drug area. So you have the counties and the cities where then that means that they just have a free ticket to go for any reason to add that extra layer onto, or why I'm now allowed to pat you down and or go in your pockets and harass you further and or put you in handcuffs for officer safety.
Yeah, it's amazing how the attributes of the high crime drug area, overlap so well with low income communities of color.
Yeah.
Right? Like, has anybody taken one step back to think about that for a minute? Like, you're just enabling overt racist police practices. It's nuts. I want to swear right now, but I'm not going to. You didn't, Sean did, but I think I'm going to hold it back. I'm going to swear with my body language.
Hold it back for a second.
Yes.
Brad, from like a philosophical level too, for all of you civil libertarians out there, think about how crazy it is that a police officer's opinion of a whole neighborhood that is disproportionately black and brown means that the Fourth Amendment means less in that neighborhood than it does in a white neighborhood. And that's happening everywhere right now.
Correct.
So, not only do you have the 3/5 clause in the Constitution, you have the Fourth Amendment high drug, high crime clause that makes black neighborhoods less worthy of constitutional rights under the way we currently interpret the Fourth Amendment.
Exactly. It's just like when you see on the jail when it says you're subject to search at any time. When you walk in these neighborhoods, they need to have a banner that says your Fourth Amendment rights are waived just by virtue of driving through here, walking through here, visiting a relative here. We can do what the fuck we want to do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think another thing, I wish, frankly, that because we've already communicated a lot of our policy ideas to legislators, there's a bigger fish here that we haven't even been talking about, and it's just the war on drugs. Yeah. This is where all of this is coming from. Like, that's where WHREN is the WHREN is the United States Supreme Court that a court case that allowed pretextual stops, all about drugs and guns. This high crime, high drug area thing, it came from drugs. The plain smell test, the odor of pot, the war on drugs. It's all these things through the years where the government said we have to have the authority to investigate drug crime. And it's nuts. Like, it absolutely totally eviscerated the Fourth Amendment. So yeah, happy days. So I'm going to talk just for a minute about loud exhaust. If we got we have the loud exhaust slide. It's just the statute. So this is what happens when you don't consult criminal defense attorneys with your statute. So they wrote this statute, Virginia legislature did, 46.2-1049. It talks about no person shall drive and no owner of a vehicle shall permit or allow the operation of a vehicle unless it's equipped with an exhaust system that prevents excessive or unusual levels of noise. So, but how do they define unusual levels of noise? This is the underlined part. An exhaust system shall not be deemed to prevent excessive or unusual noise if it permits the escape of noise in excess of that permitted by the standard factory equipment exhaust system. So really what that means is if you have a tricked out car, if you like racing your car, if you got a drag car, if you just buy an aftermarket muffler, which makes slightly more noise than the standard muffler in your vehicle, you can be pulled over at any time. Your car is illegal. And this doesn't even get into the fact that this is just like the odor of marijuana. All it is a subjective opinion. So how do cops really drive around with a decibel meter to figure out whether your exhaust matches the exhaust level of like a normal Camry? Not that anyone's got a tricked out Camry, but one of the people that I represented on this when I was in private practice, he worked at a garage. He liked fixing cars, European cars in particular. He had a BMW 3 Series. He bought it cheap because you can get some BMW 3 Series kind of inexpensive if they're old. And he started working on it to make it perform like an M3, which is the performance series. So he was buying aftermarket parts for that. He lowered the car a bit. He had some tint on the windows. And he upgraded things, the engine parts, and he had a racing muffler on it. Everything on that vehicle could be put on another BMW, but by the letter of the law, because it wasn't standard equipment on his BMW 3 Series, he could be pulled over for it. And the cop thought he was a drug dealer. So he pulled him over for it, and you just want to scream at you want to scream, but you're screaming at the wind, because the judge is going to look at this statute and say, well, this is what the legislature said. Well, it's louder than the normal car. Okay, so this is another one. Just gotta go. I'll just here symbolically. You're going loud exhaust statute. You're done. Okay. Moving on. Tags not matching the car. Lakeisha, you're up on this one.
It should be. I don't know if I gave you a small slide on that one. A lot of times what you'll see is you'll have officers either running the tags or plates just on a car in general, if it's a nice car, run the license plate to see if it matches the car that it is or if the tags are expired, the way that it's hanging. So there's a code section on all of this that the slide should have up for you. And what you see happen often is the officers are using that to either say to stop, like I said, if the registration has expired or the tags don't match, and or to see if the driver is suspended or the owner of the vehicle suspended, because a lot of times they may not even see the driver, but it may come back that the owner or who the car is registered to has a suspended license, and they'll pull the car for that. And so they're using it for all these reasons to have a reason to stop the car, and then getting there and ask for the permission to search the vehicle, or for permission for ask the person any extra questions about any criminal activity. So you're seeing that a lot more, especially here in Portsmouth. We're seeing where they're running the tags on the car, and if it comes back to a female's name, they're using it as a reason to stop the vehicle if it's a guy driving, or different things like that. And in the high crime, high drug area, and they're having a lot of car thefts and license plates being stolen and tampered or damaged. So we're seeing a lot of that here.
Yep. Sean or Brian, do you have anything to
I just,
on that point?
so Lakeisha's mentioned a couple times the asking people, like the next step is asking people to search, right? So police are really good. This is not necessarily the topic for today, but it's the next step in all this pretextual stuff. Police are really good at eliciting consensual searches. And by consensual, we mean, 4 or 5 heavily armed and armored agents of the government approach you, a person who watches the news and understands what police do to people who don't fully comply. And then they say something like, well, we're going to search your car. Cool. And, they've got their hand on their gun. They're all standing around you in a menacing way. And the average person is not going to know, or not going to have the sort of balls, I guess, to say, no, you can't search me under that circumstance. You can't do that. I'm an attorney, and I know that they can't do that, but I can't say for sure in those circumstances that I would necessarily make the right decisions, because it is highly stressful, and I don't trust police. I don't trust them to do the right thing if I exercise my rights. So the next step in a lot of these things is that consensual search, and which is sort of another topic, but it's definitely one of the evils that is presented by this pretextual stuff.
Yeah.
Totally, and that's where it's all going. And it's I know we touched on that a little bit earlier, but we can't say it enough, because this is the reason this is how you stop excessive force. I think the best way to do it, stop these incidents from ever happening. There is a meme that's going around. It's not just a meme, because it's true. That Philando Castile was stopped something like 50 times for BS traffic stops for the fatal incident that ended his life. That by the way, that none of these stories break my heart more than that one. And that's it is because of this. That was a stop that was allowed because of this vague description. Basically, hey, a black man robbed a store, and then the cop was like, oh, look, here's a black man near where the store was. And then they started questioning him and then kill him. But, you stop those nonsense encounters and this stuff doesn't happen, So moving on, we got another one. We got dark tint. Brian Kennedy.
Yep, so we have a slide on this so people know what tint is. Some cars don't have it. My Honda Civic does not have any tint. But my wife's car has tint, and a lot of your cars probably have tint, and it either comes from the factory or you can get tint put on afterwards. So there's a statute that says in Virginia, your front and window and your rear window have to have a certain amount of visibility through them. But your side windows, where this normally comes in, has to be 35%. That has to be the light that can get through it. So there's a slide up right now that basically, if we go back to the other slide, that shows the gradations of tint. And if you try to look at 30 to 40% there, one being legal and one being illegal in Virginia, it's really hard to tell. And it's even more difficult to tell if it's early in the morning, if it's nighttime, where it's impossible to tell, or it's twilight or whatever it is. So there's probably well over half the day where if you're looking through a car window, driving past it, you're not going to be able to tell the difference between 20 and 45% tint. But if a police officer thinks your tint's illegal, they can pull you over. And then they take out this little thing called a tint meter or tintometer and look at it, which is just a reason to open your door, pull down your window, put the little monitor on there, and get a look inside your car. So this is a problem because it's another one of those vague ones that's really hard to tell. Officers say they're trained on tint and they can tell 35%, just from driving past it. And that's before you even get into those of us who live in parts of the state near Maryland, West Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina, or live near big interstate highways or near the beach, places where people are going. Every state has a different rule about tint. And it's really messed up that a cop can stop you if your tint is legal where your car is registered and where you're from, but you happen to be driving through Virginia. So I've had police officers tell me, oh, I know the law in Georgia, and Georgia is 40% tint, and it looked like it was illegal in Georgia, even if it was legal in Virginia, that type of stuff, which is just pure nonsense. But if they say that in court, hey, judge, I know in Georgia it's 40%, and it looked like it was less or more than 40%, that's all the judge needs.
It makes
That's
me,
all they
it
have to
just,
say.
I just thought of something, Brian. You ever gone shopping for paint colors?
Yes.
You gotta compare 40 shades of white. You're like, how are these different? It's pretty much that. You know?
And whatever one you think look good on the little card is not what it looks like on the, on the sample, and not what it looks like on your wall.
Right.
So we're guessing colors, and they're bad at it. But anyone who is, and again, it's not, my wife's not getting pulled over for her tint on her car. It's clients who either have beat up cars or cars that look too nice for them. Mm-hmm. Or cars that, hey, you came out of this neighborhood, you came out of this person's house, we're going to stop you and check your tint, which again is the problem.
So we're past, we're almost at an hour, but Sean, tell us about walking outside of the painted lines of a crosswalk.
Yeah, so I got this one because I have a homeless client who's been charged with like 60 some odd offenses of this type. I looked today and there's 8 code sections that make it unlawful to be a pedestrian in the roadway in different ways, like stepping out between 2 parked cars where you can't be seen while you have a foot in the roadway, not standing all the way to the left if you happen to be walking on a street where there's not a sidewalk, some very specific regulations as to how you should be a pedestrian. But as anyone who lives anywhere near like urban or dense or suburban areas, jaywalking is just a way of life. Like we all do it. It's the way you get to places without going all the way to the next block. Like we all cut across the street. But we all who look like me don't ever get, I've never been harassed for jaywalking, and I'm likely to have done it, several thousand times in a lifetime.
I did it 3 times in front of the Arlington County Police Department today alone.
Oh, I do it all. Yeah, the Arlington County Courthouse right there. I've jaywalked at every angle going in there, and no one's ever said anything. But it's just a way to harass people, and particularly people who are standing around and the police can't stop them for a bullshit car stop because they're not in a car. So you get to harass people for whatever various jaywalking violation they commit that everyone commits, but just based on how they look. And I thought Brian had a specifically heinous example of this, maybe.
Yeah, and again, it comes up a lot for people who are homeless, especially, but these cases also turn into you're crossing where they don't want you to cross. They stop you for that. You either are upset. A lot of people get upset about thinking they're being harassed. There's a disagreement. The police officer overreacts to the disagreement, and then all of a sudden the person who was jaywalking ends up slammed into the ground or tased or charged with assault on a police officer, which unfortunately stupid stuff like jaywalking turns into felony charges with a 6-month mandatory minimum, for anyone who's been following that issue as well, over things like this that are vague and that, you know, not everyone gets stopped for, and reasonable minds could disagree even whether it's a crime or not. So that's the other big thing about these, is that if you're on the foot, it can easily turn into something more serious over some nonsense.
Yeah, you know, when you're, I think when we're talking about this stuff, we're public defenders, court-appointed attorneys. We tend to have like a dark sense of humor because we have to exist and to make it through the day. And I'm laughing about the absurdity of this stuff, but it's not a laughing matter. And I don't mean to make light of how this has affected our state or our country. I mean, this is the problem that needs to be solved. So hope nobody was misled by me laughing at the absurdity of walking outside of a crosswalk. So I don't know that we assigned this one. Did any of us prepare the ashing the cigarette out the window or not? Anyone want to talk about that? Anyone have an example? Just give us the black letter law on it.
So anytime police see something that is, I think, I forget what the word says, but a lit object flying out the window, they can stop you, and it's actually a class 1 misdemeanor to flick a cigarette out.
What's a class 1 misdemeanor?
Class 1 misdemeanor is punishable by up to 12 months in jail.
Wow.
So for flicking a cigarette, but that doesn't necessarily get right at the pretext issue, which is if you're smoking a cigarette and driving down the street and you flick it out the window, especially at nighttime, you will see embers, right? You will see stuff fly off of that. And I think what we run into is police stopping people for that, or just for nothing, right? Because how are we going to disprove that an officer saw a tiny little flash of ember come out of the vehicle? And I've yet to have a police officer come into the courthouse with the actual offending butt to say, this is why I stopped him. I got him. Because when these cases come to court, they're not for flicking a cigarette out the window. They're for whatever the cop found when they went rifling through the car or people's pockets. Yeah.
So that brings us to the end of our list, unless I've forgotten any. Did I forget any, folks? No? Okay. So putting some of this in context, I know we keep trying to do that to help you understand the gravity of the problem here. And I just remember a couple of statistics from where I practice law, Arlington County, Virginia. So these offenses, these types of police interactions they are the greatest, I think, the single greatest source of racial disparities in our justice system. Marijuana possession in Arlington, Virginia, 9% of Arlington County residents are Black. 60% of the people who are arrested for marijuana possession are Black in Arlington County. By the way, when pressed on this, and this still exists on the county police website, when pressed on why those disparities exist, they explain it because a lot of them start from traffic stops with out of the area residents. Like that's any better. So you're only racist when you're doing your police stops. Give me a break. But this disparity is not going to change now that we've decriminalized marijuana. We talked about that. They still have this tool. It was a tool they fought for. It was a tool that legislators actually talked about. This is why we're not taking it away, because the police have told us that it has investigative value to them. Investigative value. The ability to stop someone. By the way, the odor pot, even better than most of these, air quotes again, even better than most of these pretexts, because not only does it give you the right to stop somebody, but it gives you the right to search them. Another stat in Arlington County, I think that there's about 2,000, maybe a little fewer than 2,000 arrests for driving on a suspended license each year in Arlington. Half of the people charged with driving on a suspended license are Black. Every single one of those driving on suspended license charges had to begin with traffic enforcement. with enforcement of one of these ridiculous laws. So explain to me again, 9% of the county, 50% of the people who are getting these types of charges that start with traffic enforcement. So you want a more fair justice system. You want to get rid of these violent encounters. Well, I want to get rid of the encounters to begin with. Like what I'm concerned about is not just how gentle my police are when they arrest somebody. I'm concerned about the arrest itself and the ultimate conclusion of the arrest, which is putting a life behind bars. And right now there are 1 million Black Americans in jails or prisons in America. There are 1.5 million Black Americans on probation or parole. If all we do is make the cops gentler in those, 1,000, violent force cases, that's good. But you know what? You're not changing the broader problem. You're not getting at the heart of the issue. And that's really where we got to get. And this is the place you start. You cannot do police reform without getting rid of these pretexts and ending pretextual policing altogether. It's just got to stop. So that's my final monologue. I'll turn it up to each one of you for some final words before I give the closing pitch about how people can get involved. Sean, how about you start us off?
I thought I would say bullshit a lot more in this presentation, so I'll just say this is a bunch of bullshit and it should stop.
Lakeisha?
The only thing I'll say is a lot of people, when they hear this, some folks think it's justified because they think the end result is that they always find a crime or that they find drugs, and it's not always the case. A lot more of my cases end in assault and batteries on a law enforcement officer because now the force has escalated and then folks start to defend themselves, or obstruction of justice charges or other things come. It's not always that there are drugs found. And even if they were, we got to get past the ends justify the means. And that's all I want to say.
Brian.
Some people will say getting rid of these traffic infractions is going to be a problem because it'll be more unsafe cars on the road. But remember, in Virginia, you have to bring your car to get inspected every year. Anyway, they're going to find this stuff. It's not going to be some type of hellscape with cars with no lights and stuff going around the road.
Mad Max. That's what the final conclusion, right? We're on the slippery slope.
Right. So it's not going to be that. Everything's going to be okay. It'll make things better for everybody if we reduce these interactions.
Yeah. So now you've heard information. So this is the whole point of why we were here tonight. The keys to making a difference are, one, to get informed. That's why we're doing this series. Criminal justice reform can be really complex sometimes. It can be really nuanced. If you sat through this or part of this, you passed the first test, which is getting informed. Keep tuning in. We're going to have 2 more of these in the next 2 weeks, and I think we're going to keep doing them through August. Next week we have an amazing presentation on community oversight. So you hear people talking about civilian review boards. Civilian review boards are it's supposed to be an independent body, which is a local community check on local police practices. There aren't many of them in Virginia right now. There are actually very few, and even fewer that have the kind of authority they need to be effective. There's a lot of talk about this nationwide because civilian oversight holds some of the greatest promise for real police reform, and it intrinsically or inherently is a local process. So it helps give community buy-in. Communities that are over policed then can have some say in how their police department polices them. And we have as co-sponsors the Legal Aid Justice Center, my favorite nonprofit in Virginia. We also have the Fairfax County NAACP and the Richmond, I want to get the acronym right, Transparency and Accountability Project. Did I get that? I think I got it. We have representatives from each one of those groups, including current and former members of civilian review boards, community oversight organizations. That's going to be on July 22nd, and we're going to start at 6:30. So tune in for that. That's going to be excellent. And then in July 28th, we have a session where we will, Brad Lindsay, who's a deputy public defender in Lynchburg, our own Ashley Shapiro, who's a public defender in Richmond, and Professor Julie McConnell, who is a professor at Richmond Law School, will be joining us to talk about police in schools, which is another hot topic. Should that be happening, and how present should police be in schools? And also the assault on law enforcement statute in Virginia, which arguably is, among unjust mandatory minimums, might be the least just in Virginia. It's really ridiculous. So keep tuning in for those. Also, in order to stay up on information, please follow us on social media. We now have a Facebook page. You're watching it on the Facebook page, probably. We also are posting these videos to YouTube so you can watch them later or share them with your friends. We have an Instagram page, and we have Twitter. All the links, I think there's probably a slide right now that's showing you the links to those. Hopefully there is, or maybe we can find it. If those links are not up, check our website, check our Facebook page to get all that information. But that's where you get the most current information. And also, we're doing a month-long series of content that also echoes what's being presented in these virtual events. And lastly, so there aren't many people that are involved in criminal justice reform anywhere. Yes, a lot of people care about this stuff, and a lot of you are getting interested and want to get involved. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of people don't have a lot of time, and a lot of people don't know how to do it. And then people who both have the time and know how to do it sometimes aren't willing to commit that time to put in the really hard work that needs to get done in order to change the law. That's what we're doing with Justice Forward Virginia. We are currently volunteer-led and operated. We are very bad at fundraising because we're all public defenders and court-appointed attorneys. We don't think we should get any money for doing anything we're doing. We think we should just be helping the world. But you know what? We're at the point we need your money. So we're asking you, if you can, even if it's $20, $50, if it's $500, whatever you can afford, whatever you are willing to donate. We now, in addition to having a political action committee, we recently organized as well as a 501c4 as a nonprofit. So for those of you who care about what kind of organization you're giving to, you now have your options. So with that, I just want to say thanks. We went a little over time, but not too long. I think we stayed mostly to schedule. Anyone raise their hand if I'm missing anything? Brian, you would know? Okay, I think I got it all covered. So thanks again. I hope everyone has a great night, and hopefully we will see you on July 22nd. Bye-bye.
Bye.